Paul Thomas Anderson's The Master is my favourite film of his, and I think it's sorely underrated. Largely because his louder films like Boogie Nights or There Will Be Blood drown out the conversation. The Master captivated me the first time I saw it in 2012, but it also left me unsure of myself. I walked out afterwards alongside a friend of mine and we were both deep in thought. We agreed that we liked it and that it was very well made, but we didn't have anything substantial to say. So I think it's the kind of film that should be seen more than once, and I think as well that I was too young when The Master came out to appreciate it fully, and probably still can't even now. But let's entertain the possibility that I might have something somewhat worthwhile to say. The best part of The Master to me is also the hardest to quantify. It's a vibe, and it breaks my heart a little bit more every time I watch it. Do you ever look around at the world and simply want to kill yourself? I'm not depressed and I'm not at risk. What I'm referring to is a sense of hopeless certainty that everything is pointless. Everything I do is worthless and all noble sentiments are lies. Nothing of value will come from living a healthy and productive life, and I can never change that. We're all trapped on a prison planet.
I'll talk them into suicide. It doesn't matter.
So what is a good way to explore such a feeling in a narrative format? Perhaps you look at traumatized men post-World War II. You take a man from that group and expose him to a world where new religions were proliferating, including one quite like Scientology. Though don't tell Paul Thomas Anderson I said that. Men with gunshot wounds in their souls need to find a way to handle this world, and so of course one solution to escape the pain is to build a system that explains everything. There's a reason for the sorrow, and if we can figure out the root cause, then we can resolve it. We're just one piece of knowledge away from wholeness. That deep ache in your chest is a God-shaped hole, and maybe that's true. Maybe we're all prodigals aimlessly wandering this earth, like lost spirits moving through a desolate landscape, like Freddie Quell, and home is just a voyage away. We'll eventually find a loving father is waiting for us in this other place, on another plane, and he'll admire our meager talents and share a cigarette with us. If we could only find him. So the first technical element to note is the fantastic editing from Leslie Jones and Peter McNulty. Immediately after Quell leaves the stability of the military, we get the first dissolve in the film. Then after Quell leaves his job as a photographer, we get the second dissolve. And yes, you guessed it, after fleeing his job as a farmhand, we get another dissolve. The opening 20 minutes cleverly sets up the feeling of a ghost story in which Quell fades into one world and then off into another. As we move along, you do get the sense that the Master is presented to us like water, ever-flowing and immaterial. We are with Quell on this journey through the spirit world. We're ghosts as well, interacting with other hopeless figures who are rarely more than avatars of our own psyche. The film becomes more solid after Quell meets Dodd and each man bonds to one another, producing a kind of stability and solace. We cut from scene to scene with a clear progression up to the release of Dodd's next book, The Split Saber. As fractures appear and Dodd is revealed to be less messiah and more mere mortal, we would anticipate a return to the wandering style during the first 20 minutes with another dissolve. But instead the film remains firm, cutting between time and space as Quell has become more stable. He can root himself into this earth, despite what I think is a terminal illness afflicting him at the end, and walk alone with some degree of peace. And so we cut from his time with Dodd to a visit to Doris's childhood home and onward to its conclusion. I'll pause there on that, but hold it in mind for later. Another element is how editing and shot composition are used very effectively to tell the story of multiple secondary characters who have very little dialogue. Everyone knows Hoffman, Phoenix, and Adams are brilliant, and they were recognized at the time of its release, so I thought it'd be good to talk about Jesse Plemons and Rami Malek instead. Those two are so often in the background of scenes dominated by the other three, and yet I think do a phenomenal job of conveying every detail necessary to understand their character. We see Val's entire journey from being a reluctant and cynical follower through to genuine doubt, then on to conviction that it's all a load of crock, before experiencing some kind of Damascus conversion, and Val barely speaks. Jesse Plemons is a real actor who can convey multitudes with very little. He also took Kirsten Dunst from me! The same is true of Rami Malek's Clark. We witness his innocence, his growing disdain for Quell, and ultimately pleasure at goading a guy he comes to loathe. And yet, once again, his character has very little dialogue and is often a blip in the background. around. Malek is extremely understated, and at times his work seems effortless. All the way throughout though, you can tell, or at least I thought I could tell, what he was thinking because he conveys that information to us with his body. What's useful to note regarding the editing is when the team cut into a mid-shot showing a reaction from either of these two men. Throughout the film, we're given small moments which help clue us in on the stages of a secondary character's arc, and yet it's never forced upon us because they rarely speak. This is very unusual in my opinion, as most films would give these characters barely a passing thought outside of what dialogue they have. It would take, I think, a very strong mind to hold these pieces together and allocate them the appropriate amount of time in the edit to ensure they're three-dimensional and yet not the focus. Lastly, I must comment upon the idea that Dodd and Quell engage in a romantic relationship. There are two moments which make me wonder this. You'll have to forgive my use of screenshots as I couldn't find video footage. Late in the film, Dodd sets up a game in which we must pick a point and ride a motorcycle straight at it. Quell takes his turn and instead of returning to the group, just keeps on going. Immediately after Dodd realizes that Quell isn't coming back, the song No Other Love by Joe Stafford begins to play. The opening lyrics are, "No other love can warm my heart, now that I've known the comfort of your arms. No other love, oh, the sweet contentment that I find with you every time, every time." We then see Dodd walking left to right in the desert, and then cut to Quell walking right to left. Dodd is walking after Quell, the dragon he sought to tame, and Quell is walking towards Doris, the angel he forgot to claim, and each man is mirrored in this romantic pursuit. Now, I put that down to Dodd and Quell being a thing, or at the very least that Dodd loved Quell romantically, as I think the shots were edited together with the song to illustrate this. Dodd for Quell, Quell for Doris, and in the end neither man gets the love of his life. But I could be wrong. Maybe I just want a bisexual Scientology love triangle film, and frankly, why hasn't Todd Haynes made that yet? On this note, a thought which occurred to me is the line in Genesis 2:18. "It is not good for the man to be alone. I will make a helper suitable for him." Adam was a perfect man living in a perfect world in complete harmony with his creator, and yet it wasn't right. It was incomplete, for it is not good for man to be alone. And so Eve was created, and everything was right for a moment. Consider the opening of The Master, the boys on the beach, an Eden if you will, fighting and drinking and simply being men, free from judgment and shrewish disapproval, and yet they're incomplete. They build the sandcastle woman because they need more. In The Master, both Quell and Dodd are like wandering spirits in search of a partner to give them substance. It is not good to be alone, and aberrant behavior is the natural outworking of this. Whether it's Doris or it's Dodd or various strange women, some of whom look great by the way, shout out to Apricot Belly Babe, the film repeatedly shows the coming together and falling apart of the couple through Quell's journey. Dodd has a spouse but is still reaching out for a partner of his own, which is why I think it suggests he's a homosexual. There's also this, of course.
I'd love to get you on a slow boat to China.
Perhaps Dodd's movement, much like Scientology, views such desire as a mark of brokenness, and so he's trapped by his own ideology in the closet. And no, I'm not going to insert a Tom Cruise in the closet joke here. I think the poor guy has taken enough crap to last several lifetimes. What I will say is that I don't think any amount of money is worth the nonsense which comes with fame. Can you imagine going through something as painful as a divorce and being dragged over the coals in public discourse at the same time about your sex life? Yes, he has all his material needs catered to, and I can understand being envious of that and wanting to lash out, but the emotional or spiritual torment of unending judgment would be a truly horrific experience. I wouldn't wish fame on my worst enemy. Limitless wealth with anonymity is the wisest play. The Rothschilds outsmarted us all again. Entertain a further digression, dear viewer. It's extremely difficult for a father to instill values in his children which allow for his vision to continue to manifest after he's passed away. Whether it was L. Ron Hubbard Jr. turning on his dad, or more recent comments that have come out about Elon Musk's eldest not supporting him, this is a quandary that every generation must wrestle with. So I would recommend you study Meyer Amschel Rothschild far beyond conspiracy theories, which I of course love, for the principles behind building a dynasty. Nepotism and inheritance are essential for this, but it's all for naught if the values aren't reproduced first. That's the trouble with a trust fund, baby. There's no guiding ethos to anchor them in reality. More generally, Jewish people excel in this department, and we can go all the way back to the lessons of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. As each member of that multi-generational triad continued to worship Yahweh and keep the flame of his burgeoning religion alive in a hostile environment. Another biblical example would be when the patriarch Joseph was taken back into the land of Canaan by his children to be buried. Father provided sons with instruction, and sons followed through after father wasn't around to make them do it. The same occurs with the commands King David left for Solomon regarding the creation of the temple and the destruction of David's enemies. And here's a Bible deep cut to bust out on a first date with an Instagram model who just might make a good bride in your burgeoning cult. The Rechabites were an Abrahamic tribe whose patriarch made them vow to never drink wine. A generation later, there was a fire and brimstone prophet named Jeremiah who was sent by God to their tent to order them, in God's name, to drink. The Rechabites invited certain death because they refused to do so. You see, that would dishonor the vow to their forefather, a man many of them had never met, and even God himself couldn't scare them into betraying their Father in heaven. Can you guess what happened next? God gave the Rechabites an eternal blessing for being resolute in the commitment to their patriarch's wishes. He also spanked the Israelites for disobedience. He's a very complicated guy. Now, can you really say you've succeeded as a father if your children don't follow your directions even after you've passed, and especially at the risk of death itself? As I said before, Jewish people excel in this department and have for millennia, and personally, I just want to be the best in all areas of life, and so I'll learn from anyone. Oh, really? Really? I'm saying something nice, which could help all the fathers who watch this video create a multi-generational family plan, and you go and ruin it. What possesses you to tarnish something sterling? I mean, yeah, okay, fine. I've read a bit of Mein Kampf. A bit. I like to read. Sue me. And yeah, maybe he had a few good points about democracy.
Because democracy basically means government by the people, of the people, for the people. But the people are retarded.
Between you and me, I feel like one of the people when I watch a PTA film. How does anyone get that good at filmmaking? It's very intimidating. But there is one thing which makes me feel like a king amongst paupers. 33! And I must say, Mr. Anderson, I expect more from such a highly esteemed filmmaker. I really do. So much thought went into The Master, and then he just sticks a 3 on a red cop car like he made this thing for an audience of sheeple with scales upon their eyes. Come on, mate. Some of us need more than a light tickle. Do Hollywood types not realize that millions have now been formed in the treacherous morass of the World Wide Web? Half an hour on Twitter sees us exposed to more schizo geniuses than that town could produce in a year. You gotta step up your game this century, mate, and you must never let the mansions and genteel chit-chat rob you of creative madness. We were not made to fit in. So while I give PTA a lot of praise, it must be said that if he slacks off in the 33 department, then I'm going to have to unleash the acid pen, and hell hath no fury like anonymous invective. Now, if you want to click off at this juncture, then I'll completely understand. I get it, I can be a bit much, a little abrasive, but I have a bit more I'd like to talk about with The Master. Gothic Anderson is the best Anderson, and The Master, when paired with Phantom Thread, makes for a marvelous secrets and ghosts and It Is Not Good for Man to Be Alone double feature. Particularly, I consider the auditing sequence to be the best 20 minutes of cinema this century. I know it's a big statement, and there are other contenders, but I think this wins out because I really appreciate the simplicity and subtlety. There is so much power in the dialogue, acting, editing, shot choice, and music, especially when normally a shot reverse shot would be cause for frustration. As you sit there thinking, couldn't you have figured out some blocking? They spent how much money on this student film? But I think it makes sense given the intimacy between these two characters. Nothing else matters but these men and the tender, passionate moment they share. So firstly, I love the acting from Phoenix and Hoffman. You can see exactly when Freddy lies and tells the truth, and it comes across as completely natural because Joaquin is a rare talent. Hoffman gets in the game too with close-ups on Dodd, which allow us to see him scanning Quell's face and probing him for the truth during the second stage of the audit. It's very impactful since you can tell that Dodd is shocked by Quell's incest story and deeply concerned for his well-being. There is no tedious exposition here about Dodd's altruistic heart. It's all over his face, and it suggests to us early on that maybe the cause isn't all hokum. Furthermore, I really appreciated that Quell starts blinking and crying towards the end as a tumult of pent-up emotion is let loose. But Dodd doesn't cry infringement because he has Quell in the zone. He is using these draconian measures to effect a genuine breakthrough in this man's life, and you can, for a moment, reason with yourself that his methods are justified because they appear to work. Furthermore, we get two very nice shot choices from Paul Thomas Anderson that resonate very strongly with me. The first is the image of the ship's wake trailing off as Quell releases trauma. The second is that when the session ends, Anderson breaks the 180-degree rule and shoots Quell and Dodd from the other side of the table. I thought it was a very subtle and effective way of visually portraying Quell's emotional breakthrough and illustrates how their relationship has radically changed, which I really adore. So many filmmakers would want to have a showy display of their technical abilities, but in this instance, PTA opts for something gentle, and it's even more impressive for it. I also think it's worth mentioning here that Stanley Kubrick is so well known for the in-your-face 180 shift, but here PTA shows us a calmer and more emotionally sensitive use for this tactic. Sometimes I'll watch that auditing scene in isolation just to get close to greatness. And so I come to the end of this discursive, digressive, somewhat depressing appetizer of a review of The Master. I've barely scratched the surface, but I hope you've enjoyed the ride. The Master is my favorite film from Paul Thomas Anderson, and one I highly recommend you watch and rewatch in this life and the next. Now maybe we must carry our own weight, be our own god as it were, perhaps like Freddie Quell in the final scene, although other interpretations abound. And perhaps if we're lucky we can make a bit of heaven here on earth in the arms of a bonny lass in a British pub. Perhaps after all the noise subsides, the obnoxious opinions and strident ideologies, we're all just a Terry in search of a Julie.